One evening, while flipping through TV channels, I saw an interview with psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. The doctor was telling a story about a girl who was brought back to life by doctors. When she regained consciousness, the girl said that at some point she floated out of her body and went to heaven. When I heard this story from Kubler-Ross, I considered it very unprofessional on the part of a psychiatrist and vowed to prove her wrong, Dr. Melvin Morse said about this situation. By that time, he had been working as a pediatrician in Seattle for more than 10 years. Some of his patients experienced clinical death. However, Melvin Morse had never heard the stories that Kubler-Ross told from any of them. In order to refute these stories, Morse began his scientific study. A group of 8 doctors took part in it, headed by Melvin Morse. Melvin Morse began his scientific research in 1980. By 1992, the doctor and his colleagues had collected 133 stories of children who had had extraordinary experiences. After the results of this scientific research were published, Melvin Morse began receiving letters from people who had experienced something similar. In his research, Melvin Morse cited stories of children of different ages. Thus, one of them describes the case of a 14-year-old boy who had rheumatic fever. Despite our efforts, the patient's condition was rapidly deteriorating. One day he called his sister. It seemed to him that someone was hitting his chest. This is how Melvin Morse describes this case. Later, the rescued boy shared the following memories. When I told my sister about my condition, she ran out of the room to call the doctor. At that moment, something strange happened. I followed my sister, although she did not pay any attention to me. The boy saw the nurse run up to the doctor and call him into the room. The invisible patient followed them. Together with Melvin Morse, he looked at his own body until he suddenly felt that someone was watching him. To the left and right of me stood 2 luminous beings. It seemed that they were also watching the attempts to revive his body. The presence of these beings calmed me. One of them asked me if I wanted to go with them or stay here. I answered that I did not want to go anywhere, Melvin Morse's patient said. At that moment, the boy saw the doctor move away from his body. He was trying to calm the nurses who were grieving because they could not save such a young patient. He saw the nurse who had been caring for him all the time crying. Watching this picture, the boy again felt the presence of the luminous beings. They told him that he could return to his body. After that, Melvin Morse's patient felt a strong pressure and woke up in his body. He opened his eyes and a joyful cry burst from his chest, "I'm alive." Melvin Morse's research attracted great interest. The doctor began to receive letters from people who had had out-of-body experiences. Among them, for example, was 63-year-old Olga Gerhard, who lived in San Diego. In her letter, Olga Gerhard described in detail her illness, due to which in 1988 the woman began to have heart problems. She needed an operation. When the appointed day came, Olga Gerhard's close relatives were on duty at the hospital, Melvin Morse said. Olga Gerhard's daughter was also in the waiting room. She came here without her husband. Olga Gerhard's son-in-law did not like hospitals, so he decided to stay at home and wait for news there. It must be said that Olga Gerhard treated her son-in-law as if he were her own son. The operation lasted more than 8 hours and was successful. However, late in the evening, the patient's heart stopped. Olga Gerhard's relatives, who were in the waiting room, knew nothing about what had happened. Many of them fell asleep from fatigue. It was 6 in the morning when the doctor told Olga Gerhard's relatives that everything had gone well. He also did not hide the fact that the patient had almost died during the night. Upon hearing the good news, Olga's daughter immediately called her husband. However, he replied, "I already know that Olga is fine," said Melvin Morse. Olga's son-in-law said that at 3 o'clock in the morning he woke up in his bed and saw his mother-in-law at the head of it. The man decided that the operation had been cancelled for some reason, and Olga had decided to stay at her daughter's house. The man sat up in bed and inquired about his guest's well-being. You don't have to worry about me. I'll get better. Tell my daughter about it, the woman replied and disappeared. After Olga came to, she asked if her relatives had received her message. Melvin Morse decided to meet the Gerhard family in person and study the case thoroughly. He also saw the note written by Olga Gerhard's son-in-law. I have investigated dozens of such cases and have come to the conclusion that we cannot dismiss them as hallucinations or the consequences of a chemical imbalance in the brain. People who have experienced out-of-body experiences do not deny reality, as is often observed with hallucinations caused by various means. Such people do not have a distorted sense of time and place. On the contrary, they have a true perception of another reality that is superimposed on this one. And this leads me to the idea that such a reality, in which there is neither time nor space, really exists, Melvin Morse noted.